In 1994, a film opened in American cinemas, earned modest box office returns, and disappeared from theaters within weeks. The studio considered it a disappointment. The director considered his career potentially finished. The cast moved on to other projects, unsure whether anyone would ever remember the film they had spent months making in a crumbling Ohio prison. 30 years later, The Shawshank Redemption sits at the top of IMDb's user ratings, has been watched by hundreds of millions of people across every continent, and is regularly cited by filmmakers, psychologists, and ordinary viewers as a film that meant more to them than any other they have seen. How does something like that happen? The answer, according to the people who actually made it, involves a series of deliberate choices that most audiences never consciously register. Choices about music, whether color, camera angles, and character construction, that were engineered to produce an emotional response so deep it feels less like entertainment and more like personal experience. What the cast and crew have revealed over decades of interviews and retrospectives paints a picture of production far more calculated and intentional than the film's naturalistic surface suggests. The Shawshank Redemption began as a Stephen King novella called Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, published in 1982 as part of a collection. King was not primarily known as a source material for serious drama. His name was synonymous with horror, and Hollywood's interest in his work ran almost exclusively in that direction. When Frank Darabont, a relatively unknown director with limited feature film experience, acquired the rights and developed a screenplay, the project attracted little enthusiasm from major studios. Darabont has spoken extensively about the difficulty of getting the film made on terms that preserved his vision. Castle Rock Entertainment eventually agreed to produce it, but with a budget that required genuine resourcefulness. The decision to shoot on location at the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, a genuine 19th century prison that had housed real inmates until 1990, was driven partly by cost and partly by Darabont's conviction that no constructed set could replicate what a real institution of that kind would do to performances. He was right, though not in the way he initially expected. What the actual prison provided was not just visual authenticity. It provided a psychological weight that affected every actor who worked within its walls. Tim Robbins, who plays Andy Dufresne, has described the experience of spending months inside a real prison as fundamentally different from anything a studio soundstage could replicate. The cold was real. The stone was real. The oppressive scale of the architecture was real. These physical facts shape performances in ways that no director's instruction could have manufactured. Morgan Freeman, cast as Red, has said that shooting in the reformatory gave him an understanding of institutional psychology, the way a space designed to diminish human beings actually succeeds in doing so over time. That became central to how he understood his character. Red is not simply a man who has spent decades in prison. He is a man who has been physically reshaped by the experience of living inside stone walls that were built to make him feel small. Freeman found that understanding in the building itself. One of the most discussed aspects of the Shawshank Redemption among filmmakers and cinematographers is the deliberate visual grammar that Darabont and cinematographer Roger Deakins constructed to guide the audience's emotional experience without announcing itself. Deakins, who would go on to become one of cinema's most celebrated directors of photography, made a series of specific choices about how Andy Dufresne would be filmed relative to the prison environment. In the early sections of the film, Andy is consistently shot from angles that emphasize the scale of Shawshank above and around him. The walls loom. The camera looks down at him from positions that make him appear diminished, compressed, swallowed by the institution. This is not accidental framing. It is a visual argument about what prison does to a person, or what it is supposed to do. As the film progresses and Andy's inner resistance becomes more apparent to the audience, this visual relationship shifts. The camera begins to find him from positions that restore his scale within the frame. By the film's final sequences, the framing has reversed almost completely. The environment no longer dominates him. He dominates it. Deakins has noted that this progression was mapped out in deliberate collaboration with Darabont before a single frame was shot. The visual language was not improvised on set. It was pre-designed as a kind of parallel narrative running beneath the story itself, one that communicates the film's central argument about the relationship between the human spirit and the systems designed to contain it, without a single word of dialogue. The use of weather and light follows the same logic. Shawshank is predominantly gray, cold, and overcast. The prison sequences exist in a visual world that drains warmth and color. The moments of genuine human connection, the rooftop beer scene, the opera broadcast, Brooks's letter being read aloud, are lit and framed differently, with a quality of light that feels slightly warmer, slightly more open. These shifts are subtle enough that most viewers process them emotionally without identifying them analytically. They feel the difference without knowing why. Tim Robbins has spoken at length about the central challenge of playing Andy Dufresne, a character who must be perceived as innocent by the audience while never explicitly arguing for his own innocence, and who must communicate an inner life of extraordinary richness while appearing outwardly contained and controlled. The performance required Robbins to make a fundamental decision early in production. Andy Dufresne does not perform his interior life for the people around him. He keeps it entirely private. What the audience sees of Andy's inner world comes through micro-expressions, through the deliberate quality of his stillness, through the precision of his reactions in moments where most people would react with greater visible intensity. This restraint was Robbins' conscious choice, and it was not universally supported during production. The concern was that audiences would find Andy emotionally inaccessible, that a protagonist who does not externalize his feelings would create a barrier to identification. What Robbins argued, and what the film ultimately proved, was that the restraint was itself the characterization. Andy's composure under circumstances designed to break him is not a performance for other characters in the film. It is his actual nature, the thing that makes him different from everyone else inside Shawshank, and the thing that ultimately saves him. Morgan Freeman's approach to Red was built around a different challenge, creating a character whose defining quality is the gradual erosion of hope, and then finding precise internal moment when that erosion reverses. Freeman has described Red's emotional journey as one of the most technically demanding he has undertaken, because the change cannot be played externally. It has to be felt by the audience in retrospect, as they recognize that something in Red's bearing is quietly shifted across the film's duration without any single scene announcing the transition. The parole board scenes, which appear 3 times across the film, were designed as measuring sticks for this shift. Freeman played each one from a distinctly different internal position: exhausted resignation in the first, something approaching indifference in the second, and in the third, a quality of genuine presence that is described as a character finally deciding to participate in his own life again. The scripted dialogue across these 3 scenes is deliberately similar. The difference is entirely in performance, and audiences feel it without necessarily being able to articulate what has changed. Among the elements of the Shawshank Redemption that the cast and crew have most consistently identified as underappreciated is the character of Brooks Hatlin, played by James Whitmore. Brooks is the prison librarian, a gentle elderly man who has spent 50 years inside Shawshank and is released on parole mid-film. His subsequent inability to adapt to the outside world, and the quiet tragedy of his ending, occupies a relatively brief portion of the film's runtime. Darabont has described Brooks as the film's most essential supporting character, not because of his narrative function, but because of what his story does structurally. Brooks's arc is not a subplot. It is a preview. Everything that happens to Brooks after his release, the disorientation, the inability to feel safe outside institutional walls, the sense that the world has continued without him and left no space for his return, is what will happen to Red if Andy does not do what Andy does. Whitmore prepared for the role by researching the psychology of long-term institutionalization extensively, and his performance contains details that reward close attention. The way Brooks moves through the prison, with the ease and authority of someone entirely at home, contrasts precisely with how he moves through the outside world, where every space seems to press against him rather than accommodate him. This physical contrast was Whitmore's own contribution, developed through rehearsal and refined across the shooting of both sequences. Freeman has said that watching Whitmore's performance in the footage gave him a physical understanding of what Red's ending might look like if hope did not return. It made Red's final choice feel not just emotionally significant, but existentially necessary. Thomas Newman's score for The Shawshank Redemption is among the most studied in contemporary film music, and for reasons that the film's cast and crew have found instructive about the nature of effective scoring. Newman made an early decision, in collaboration with Darabont, that the score would never tell the audience how to feel in moments where the image was already doing that work. The music would not underline or amplify emotional beats that were already legible. Instead, it would create an underlying emotional texture, a kind of persistent atmosphere that the audience absorbs without fully registering. The main theme, built around a simple repeating figure played primarily on plucked strings and light percussion, was deliberately designed to resist categorization as either hopeful or mournful. It exists in an emotional middle space, the space of endurance rather than either triumph or despair. Darabont has said that this ambiguity was the entire point. The film is not about a man who is simply hopeful. It is about a man who maintains something more difficult than hope, the capacity to continue doing the necessary work even when the outcome is not visible. The Mozart sequence, when Andy locks himself in the warden's office and broadcasts an operatic duet over the prison's public address system, is the film's most celebrated use of music, and the one the cast have most frequently returned to in retrospect. Freeman has described hearing the music in that sequence, as Red hears in the film, as the closest he has come on a film set to feeling something he would describe as transcendent. The image of inmates in the yard stopping what they are doing and simply listening, not understanding the words, not needing to, was, according to Freeman, not difficult to perform authentically. The music did it. The trajectory of the Shawshank Redemption from box office underperformer to cultural institution is one of cinema's most analyzed case studies, and the people who made it have consistently offered the same explanation for both phases of that journey. The film failed commercially on initial release for reasons that are inseparable from why it eventually succeeded. It is slow by conventional thriller standards. Its emotional payoffs require patience. It asks viewers to spend time with characters in pain without offering the relief of genre conventions. No action, no mystery resolution, no romance in the traditional sense. Audiences in 1994 who arrived expecting a King adaptation with conventional dramatic momentum were disoriented by what they found. The Academy Award nominations, 7 in total, including Best Picture, extended the film's theatrical run and put in front of audiences who arrived knowing they were watching something regarded as significant. But the real turning point was home video. When The Shawshank Redemption became available to rent, it found its natural viewing context. The film rewards a kind of sustained, uninterrupted attention that a living room provides more naturally than a cinema, and it rewards multiple viewings in ways that become apparent only in retrospect. Darabont has noted that the film's eventual audience built itself one viewer at a time through personal recommendation, people telling people who told other people that this was something worth their time. This organic transmission, which now happens through social media but existed before through conversation, selected for exactly the audience the film was made for, people who wanted to feel something real rather than something efficient. What the cast and crew of The Shawshank Redemption have revealed across 30 years of retrospective conversation is that the film's power is not accidental. Every element, the location, the cinematography, the performance choices, the score, the structural placement of Brooks's story, was a product of deliberate, considered craft deployed in service of a single coherent emotional argument. That argument is not simply that hope matters, though it makes that case. It is that hope, properly understood, is not optimism. It is not the belief that things will work out. It is a decision to continue doing the necessary work regardless of whether the outcome is visible, to chip away at the wall one night at a time, for as long as it takes, trusting that the wall will eventually give way. Andy Dufresne spends 19 years making that argument with a rock hammer. The film he inhabits has spent 30 years making it with cinema. The audience, it turns out, was always there. It just needed time to find its way to the work.